For the last 10 agonizing years of my life, I lived in a state of constant, suffocating, bone-deep financial panic. It wasn't just a fleeting worry. It was an ever-present physical weight that sat squarely on my chest from the moment I woke up until the moment I finally passed out from sheer exhaustion. I was a mid-level data analyst at a sprawling, soul-crushing corporate logistics firm, working 60 to 70 hours a week just to barely, miraculously keep my head above water. My entire life was strictly defined by the relentless, grinding, merciless mathematics of urban poverty and mounting debt. I knew exactly, down to the penny, which utility bills I could pay late without getting disconnected. I knew exactly which meals to skip, masking my hunger with cheap black coffee, just to ensure I had enough gas in my sputtering, rusted 2008 sedan to make the hour-long commute to a job I absolutely despised. I knew exactly how many days I had to stretch a massive, tasteless pot of cheap boiled pasta before my next agonizingly small, heavily taxed paycheck finally cleared my overdrawn bank account. The corporate environment I was trapped in was a sterile, fluorescent-lit nightmare. My boss, a terrifyingly aggressive, deeply insecure micromanager named Greg, knew I was entirely desperate, and he deliberately, sadistically weaponized that desperation against me every single day. He was the kind of man who thrived on the power imbalance. He would routinely deny my hard-earned PTO requests at the very last minute, force me to work grueling weekends without any overtime pay under the guise of being a team player, and loudly threaten to fire me in front of the entire bullpen over incredibly minor clerical errors. He knew full well that missing even a single paycheck would result in my immediate, catastrophic eviction from my apartment. I was 29 years old, deeply depressed, profoundly isolated, physically exhausted, and absolutely convinced that I would spend the rest of my natural life running on a terrifying, endless treadmill, entirely owned by my crippling debt and the whims of cruel men like Greg. The unlikely catalyst for the most profound, mind-bending, earth-shattering shift in my entire existence began on a dreary, freezing, rain-soaked Sunday afternoon in late November. I was sitting on the floor of my cramped, drafty, poorly insulated one-bedroom apartment, shivering in a thick sweater. I was desperately, frantically trying to organize a chaotic, water-damaged cardboard box of old tax documents and useless college paperwork to find a missing W-2 form I needed for a desperate tax extension. The box smelled like mildew and old dust. As I dug past old, graded syllabi from classes I had long forgotten and faded, dog-eared Polaroids of friends I no longer spoke to, my fingers brushed against something stiff at the very bottom. I pulled it out. It was a small, unopened, yellowing envelope from a regional credit union I hadn't thought about in over a decade. It was the specific, tiny local bank branch I had used during my sophomore year of college. A place where I used to deposit my meager, crumpled cash tips from my exhausting part-time job as a late-night bartender. I stared at the logo on the envelope, a wave of distant nostalgia washing over me. I vaguely remembered abandoning the account entirely when I hastily packed up my life and moved across the country immediately after graduation. I had naturally assumed the bank had simply closed the account and seized the funds due to years of inactivity, since I specifically recalled leaving only about $14 and change in it. For reasons I still cannot entirely explain to this day, perhaps a fleeting wave of melancholic nostalgia for a simpler time, or perhaps just a desperate, subconscious need for a distraction from the miserable, freezing reality of my current life, I decided to look up the credit union online. I opened my cracked, overheating, incredibly slow laptop and typed in the name. Surprisingly, a redirect page informed me that the small local bank had been aggressively acquired and absorbed by a massive, multinational financial institution a few years prior. Out of pure, idle, procrastinating curiosity, I clicked on the small Recover Legacy account link at the bottom of the banking portal. The screen prompted me to type in my social security number, which I did, expecting an error message. Instead, it generated a page asking me to answer a series of incredibly obscure security questions I must have set up when I was 19 years old. What was the name of my first childhood pet? Buster. What was my mother's maiden name? Miller, what was the make of my first car? A Ford Taurus. I typed the answers in, my fingers hovering over the trackpad. I hit submit and requested a password reset. Miraculously, the highly sophisticated banking system recognized my ancient data. It informed me that it had sent a temporary 6-digit security code to my old, heavily spammed college email address. It took me 20 minutes of guessing passwords just to log into that abandoned Yahoo email account. Wading through a decade of promotional spam and forgotten newsletters, but I found the automated banking email. I meticulously typed the temporary password into the bank's portal, agreed to an absolute wall of updated legal terms, conditions, and privacy policies that I blindly scrolled past without reading, and clicked Access Dashboard. The screen immediately went white, loading with a small spinning blue circle in the center. I leaned back, taking a slow sip of my cold, stale, bitter coffee, fully expect to see the depressing screen officially telling me the account was permanently closed. Or worse, a screen showing a massive negative balance from 10 years of accumulated, parasitic dormant account maintenance fees that I would now be legally responsible for paying. The spinning blue circle stopped. The complex, highly detailed financial dashboard materialized on my screen. I scanned past the advertising banners for credit cards and mortgages, my eyes settling on the bold black numbers sitting neatly in the primary total assets box at the very top of the screen. Available checking balance, 24 and 4s and 319 fort. I blinked again rapidly. I dropped my coffee mug onto the carpet, spilling brown liquid everywhere, but I didn't even register the mess. I rubbed my eyes with the heels of my hands so hard I saw vibrant flashing white stars. I leaned closer to the cracked, glowing screen of my cheap laptop until my nose was almost touching the pixels, my heart suddenly skipping a literal, painful beat in my chest. I read the number again, tracing the digits with a trembling finger. $24,104,392.14. My brain completely, totally, and utterly rejected the visual information it was receiving. The human mind is not built to process that level of sudden paradigm shift. I immediately, rationally assumed it was a catastrophic glitch, a massive software error resulting from the messy bank merger, or perhaps a placeholder testing screen meant for software developers. I frantically hit the refresh button on my web browser. The page reloaded, the blue circle spinning again. The number was still there, completely unchanged. I logged out entirely, my hands shaking so violently I kept mistyping my new password, and logged back in. The number was still there. I grabbed my cheap smartphone, downloaded the bank's official mobile app using my limited data plan, and logged in through my phone. The massive, impossible number populated on the small screen, looking even more absurd. It remained stubbornly, impossibly, terrifyingly real. A sudden violent wave of intense, blinding nausea washed over my entire body. The freezing apartment suddenly felt incredibly, suffocatingly hot, and the edges of my vision began to tunnel and blur into blackness. I physically fell out of my cheap desk chair, my knees hitting the wet, coffee-stained carpet hard, and I gasped for air as a full-blown, terrifying panic attack seized my entire nervous system. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was in a vice. I wasn't joyful, I wasn't celebrating, I was absolutely, paralyzingly terrified. My immediate, deeply ingrained, poverty-stricken reaction was sheer, unadulterated terror. I was entirely convinced that a highly sophisticated international cartel had somehow used my dormant, abandoned identity to launder massive amounts of illicit drug money, or that a massive corporate wire transfer had been catastrophically misrouted by a negligent banker, and that a heavily armed FBI tactical team was going to kick down my flimsy apartment door at any second, throw a black bag over my head, and drag me away to a federal penitentiary for the rest of my life. I didn't sleep a single second that night. I didn't eat. I didn't move from the floor. I sat in the pitch dark on my lumpy, uncomfortable sofa, wrapped in a blanket, staring at my laptop screen until the battery died. I watched the cursor blink next to that impossible, astronomical, life-altering number, waiting for it to suddenly vanish, waiting for the illusion to break. It never did. The next morning, at exactly 8:01 a.m., the very minute the bank's customer service lines officially opened, I called the premium, high net worth toll-free number listed on the dashboard. My voice was cracking, my throat was dry as sandpaper, and my hands were sweating so profusely I could barely maintain my grip on my phone. A cheerful, automated voice answered, followed by a human representative. I gave the woman my ancient account number, fully bracing myself. I fully expected her to laugh, tell me there was a known system error affecting legacy accounts, apologize for the confusion, and fix my balance back to zero. She asked me a series of intense, multi-layered security questions to verify my identity. Then, as her computer populated my profile, I heard a sharp, audible intake of breath on the other end of the line. Her tone shifted dramatically, instantly pivoting from a bored, routine customer service agent to someone speaking with incredible, hushed, hyper-cautious deference. She told me she was not authorized to handle portfolios of this magnitude and immediately placed me on a secure hold. I listened to smooth jazz hold music for 10 agonizing, excruciating minutes, convinced she was calling the authorities. Finally, the hold music clicked off. A man answered. "Good morning," he said. His voice was incredibly smooth, deeply resonant, and phenomenally polite. "This is Arthur Sterling. I am a senior vice president of the Private Wealth Management and Fiduciary Division. We have been trying to reach you for several years regarding the status of this dormant account, sir. But the contact information, mailing addresses, and phone numbers we had on file were severely outdated. We are absolutely thrilled you have finally logged in and contacted us. How can we properly assist you with your portfolio today?" "Where did the money come from?" I asked. My voice was barely a raspy whisper. I was terrified of the answer. "Please, sir, you have to tell me it's not a mistake. Please tell me I'm not going to jail for wire fraud." The senior banker let out a soft, highly professional, genuinely confused chuckle. "A mistake? Going to jail? No, sir, I assure you it is certainly not a mistake, and it is entirely legal. Did you truly not receive any of the corporate buyout disclosures or the tax documents we attempted to forward?" "No," I whispered. "I haven't received anything, ever." "I see," he replied. "Well, allow me to pull up the origin file." I heard the rapid clicking of a high-end keyboard. As he slowly and methodically explained the origin of the massive funds, the deeply buried, entirely forgotten pieces of my past suddenly snapped into a brilliant, blinding, overwhelming focus. 10 years ago, during my chaotic junior year of college, my eccentric, brilliant, deeply introverted roommate, a computer science major named Elias, had been desperately trying to build a highly complex, niche data compression algorithm in our cramped, pizza box-filled dorm room. He was obsessed. He didn't sleep. But eventually, he ran entirely out of money to pay for the massive server space he needed to test the code. He was devastated and told me he was going to have to drop out of school to work full-time. Because he was my friend, and because I hated seeing him defeated, I gave him $500 in cash straight from my bartending tip jar. It was a massive, crippling sum for me at the time, basically my entire semester's food budget. In exchange, mostly as a joke to make it feel official, Elias drafted a rough, handwritten contract on a yellow legal pad, had it notarized by a campus librarian, and legally granted me a flat 5% equity founder stake in his totally non-existent, hypothetical company. To make it legitimate, we walked down to that tiny local credit union and opened a joint business checking account to deposit the funds. A year later, the stress of college got to us. We had a massive, ugly, screaming falling out over something incredibly stupid, unwashed dishes and unpaid utility bills. He packed his bags, moved abruptly to the West Coast without a word, and I never spoke to him again. I entirely forgot about the $500, bitterly writing it off as a stupid, naive college mistake that cost me a friendship. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have possibly known, was that my socially awkward former roommate's obscure algorithm had actually worked. It had worked perfectly. It eventually became the foundational revolutionary architecture for a massive, multi-billion-dollar cloud computing acquisition by one of the largest tech conglomerates in the world. When Elias's company was aggressively acquired and taken private 4 years ago, the corporate lawyers and fiduciary teams executed the massive equity payouts to all registered shareholders. Because my name was still legally bound on the original founding documents, and because that ancient joint account was the absolute only routing number they had on file for my specific shares. The massive 8-figure payout was wired directly into the dormant credit union account. The bank had simply received a perfectly legitimate, fully taxed, completely legal corporate wire transfer for $24 million. Because the account was technically valid and active, the bank parked the money, sent a dozen certified letters to my old college apartment, which were repeatedly returned to sender, and simply waited for me to eventually claim it. For 4 years, $24 million had been sitting in a digital vault, quietly accumulating interest, while I was agonizing over the price of cheap canned soup. The funds are entirely clear. The taxes were withheld at the corporate level prior to disbursement, and the capital is legally, unequivocally yours, sir, Arthur Sterling concluded, his voice pulling me back to the present reality. It is fully available for immediate withdrawal, wire transfer, or investment. Whenever you are ready, would you like to schedule an in-person appointment with one of our private wealth fiduciaries to discuss long-term asset allocation and wealth protection? Yes, I breathed out, the world spinning around me. Yes, I will call you back, Arthur. I hung up the phone. I slowly laid down on the floor of my tiny kitchen, pressed my face against the cold, peeling, cheap linoleum and wept. I didn't just cry. I sobbed from the absolute deepest, most primal broken part of my soul. I cried for the 10 years of agonizing, relentless stress that had aged me prematurely. I cried for the countless meals I had skipped, the medical appointments I had ignored because I couldn't afford the copay, and the humiliating, degrading insults I had endured from my boss. I cried for the soul-crushing, paralyzing fear that had violently dictated every single minor decision of my adult life. And then, slowly, the heavy, agonizing tears stopped. My breathing leveled out. I pushed myself off the floor, and an absolute, diamond-hard, frigid clarity took over my entire mind. I looked at the cheap digital clock on my microwave. It was 9:30 a.m. on a Monday morning. I was already an hour and a half late for my scheduled shift at the logistics firm. I walked into my bathroom, washed my face with cold water, and looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't look like a terrified analyst anymore. I walked into my bedroom and put on my cheap, ill-fitting, shiny polyester suit. I walked out of my apartment, got into my sputtering, rusted car, and drove through the heavy morning traffic toward the gray, depressing corporate office park. I walked through the revolving glass doors and stepped into the massive, noisy bullpen, feeling entirely, fundamentally alien in my own skin. The air in the office felt entirely different. The frantic, nervous, caffeine-fueled energy of my stressed coworkers, the incessant ringing of the phones, the loud clacking of keyboards, the harsh, buzzing hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. It all felt like a distant, irrelevant, incredibly pathetic simulation. I was no longer a gear in their machine. I was a god walking among stressed, exhausted mortals, armed with a secret so unimaginably powerful it made me entirely, completely bulletproof. I hadn't even reached my cubicle when Greg, my tyrant of a boss, stormed out of his corner glass office. His face was a mottled, furious red, the veins bulging in his neck, and he held a printed spreadsheet crushed in his fist. He marched right up to me, intercepting me in the center aisle in front of the entire floor, a cruel, arrogant, victorious smirk plastered on his face. He lived for these moments of public humiliation. "You're an hour and 45 minutes late," Greg barked, his voice booming loud enough for every single person in the bullpen to stop what they were doing and listen. "I don't care what your pathetic excuse is. Was your piece of trash car broken down again? I told you last week that if you couldn't manage your basic time like an adult, I would easily find someone who could. And this weekly metric report you filed on Friday before you left, you missed a critical tracking code on line 40. You cost this company exactly $50 in delayed priority shipping fees. $50. You are careless, you are lazy, and you are entirely, utterly replaceable. Don't even bother sitting down. Clean out your desk right now. You're suspended for 3 days without pay. And when you come back on Thursday, assuming you even want to keep this job, you are on a final, written warning." Normally, this exact scenario would have instantly sent me into a blind, hyperventilating panic. I would have dropped my head, groveled, apologized profusely, and begged him not to cut my hours. terrified of how I would pay my rent on the first of the month. I would have let him humiliate me, strip me of my dignity, just to keep my meager, pathetic, necessary lifeline to survival. But as I stood there looking at Greg, I didn't see a powerful, intimidating boss who controlled my destiny. I saw a small, miserable, deeply insecure, pathetic man who hated his own life. A man who derived his only fleeting joy from terrorizing vulnerable people who couldn't afford to fight back. I felt no fear. I felt absolutely nothing but a profound, overwhelming, almost clinical pity. "Greg," I said. My voice was incredibly calm, smooth, and resonant. It wasn't loud, but the absolute chilling lack of fear and submission in my tone made him stop dead. He blinked in confusion, taken aback. The entire bullpen went dead silent. Dozens of my coworkers stopped typing, holding their breath, staring at us. "Excuse me?" Greg snapped, his face reddening further, trying to reassert his dominance. "Did I say you could speak? Get to your desk and pack your things before I call security and have you escorted out." "I'm not going to my desk, and I'm not suspended," I replied, maintaining unbroken, unblinking, intensely calm eye contact. "I'm quitting, effective immediately." Greg let out a harsh, loud, mocking laugh, looking around the room at the other employees to see if anyone was enjoying the show as much as he was. "You're quitting? You? Are you insane? With what money? I know exactly how much you make. I see your direct deposits. I know you're drowning in debt. You live in a dump. You'll be begging for your job back by Thursday afternoon when your landlord knocks on your door looking for rent. You need this job. You need me." I didn't argue. I didn't insult him. I calmly reached into my suit pocket, pulled out my worn leather wallet, and extracted a crisp, brand new $100 bill I had withdrawn from a premium ATM on the drive to work. I stepped forward and placed it gently, deliberately on the corner of the nearest cubicle desk, right in front of him. "That's for the $50 in delayed shipping fees I apparently cost the company on Friday," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, terrifying, absolute authority that echoed in the silent room. "Keep the change. Buy yourself a book on basic human empathy and leadership, Greg. Because the absolute truth is, you don't manage people, you hold them financially hostage. And I am no longer your hostage. I will never be anyone's hostage ever again." I didn't pack up my desk. I left my cheap pens, my corporate coffee mug, the depressing motivational calendar I had stared at for 3 agonizing years, and my family photos. I didn't need any of it. I just turned my back on him and walked slowly, confidently toward the exit. Greg was stammering, yelling something furious behind me about blacklisting me in the industry, completely unhinged and humiliated by the fact that his favorite punching bag had just effortlessly deflected his blows, paid him off, and walked away without a scratch. The automatic glass doors slid open with a soft hum, and I stepped out into the bright, crisp, beautiful morning air. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with freedom. The next few months of my life were a whirlwind of intense, highly confidential, high-stakes meetings. I flew to the bank's headquarters. I hired a top-tier fiduciary wealth management firm, a brilliant tax attorney, and a ruthless, incredibly smart accountant. They structured my sudden, massive fortune into a highly diversified portfolio of low-risk index funds, tax-free municipal bonds, and secure irrevocable trusts. The money was locked down, legally protected from any potential lawsuits or liabilities, and engineered to generate more passive interest in a single day than I used to make in an entire year of agonizing labor at the logistics firm. I didn't do what people expect lottery winners to do. I didn't buy a massive, ostentatious mansion in Beverly Hills or a fleet of flashy, depreciating sports cars. I didn't buy designer clothes or Rolexes. I didn't want to become a target, and I deeply, fundamentally didn't want to lose myself in the shallow, soulless trappings of sudden, aggressive wealth. Instead, I bought a beautiful, modest, incredibly well-built cedar cabin sitting entirely isolated on 50 acres of pristine, heavily wooded, private land near a massive, crystal-clear lake in the Pacific Northwest. I paid off my mother's crippling mortgage entirely anonymously through a blind trust, ensuring she could finally retire from her grueling, back-breaking job as a night shift nurse without ever knowing exactly where the money came from, saving her the burden of guilt or shifting family dynamics. I quietly set up anonymous, fully funded college trusts for the children of the few friends who had supported me when I had nothing. But the absolute greatest, most profound luxury the $24 million bought me wasn't property, or international travel, or material goods. It bought me the ultimate, rarest, most valuable commodity in the entire human experience, time. I now wake up every single morning without the terrifying blaring sound of an alarm clock. I grind my own expensive dark roast coffee beans and drink my coffee on my quiet, expansive wooden porch, watching the morning mist roll slowly off the surface of the lake. I spend my days reading heavy, complex books I never had the mental energy for, learning the slow, patient art of woodworking, and taking long, aimless, beautiful hikes through the dense, evergreen forest with my loyal rescue dog. I don't check my bank balance in a cold sweat at the grocery store checkout line anymore, praying my card doesn't decline over a carton of eggs. I don't lie awake at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling, wondering with a knot in my stomach how I am going to survive the winter heating bills. The suffocating, heavy, crushing anvil of relentless capitalism has been permanently, unequivocally lifted from my chest. Sometimes, when the house is entirely silent except for the crackle of the fireplace, I think back to that freezing, rainy Sunday afternoon in my old apartment. I think about the tiny, dusty, yellowing envelope buried at the bottom of a cardboard box that completely rewrote the trajectory of my entire existence. I think about my old roommate Elias, wherever he is, and the profound butterfly effect of a $500 loan born out of friendship. But mostly, I think about the millions of people who are still trapped in that miserable, gray corporate bullpen. I think about the people enduring the daily, soul-crushing humiliations of cruel managers like Greg, trading the best, most vibrant years of their brief, beautiful lives just for the basic right to survive. It fills me with a profound, quiet, daily gratitude, but also a deep, empathetic sorrow, because I learned the ultimate truth about money. Wealth is absolutely not about what you can buy to show off to other people. True, absolute wealth is the unshakable, fundamental freedom to simply exist on your own terms, to own your own hours, and to never be forced to bow your head to another human being out of financial desperation. I accidentally unlocked a forgotten digital vault, and inside I didn't just find $24 million. I found my dignity. I found my peace. I found my life. And for the first time since I was a child, I have never, ever felt more profoundly, beautifully alive.